Welcome to our lesson. Group 1 is presenting. Introduction. Today's lesson is about describing and comparing diffusion, osmosis, facilitated transport, and active transport, and the factors that affects the rate of diffusion across the cell membrane. What is diffusion? The definition of diffusion is the movement of particles in a solid from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, resulting in the uniform distribution of the substance. During the diffusion, molecules move from the area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. They are said to move down a concentration gradient. The material that undergoes the transport is known as diffusion, or permeant or penetrant. As an example, consider the following. As we can see, a dye molecule has been inserted in a water molecule. These dye molecules have a high concentration at initially, but as time passes, these molecules begin to spread out and go to low concentration areas of the jar, finally being evenly distributed in the jar or reaching equilibrium.
What is osmosis? Osmosis is a movement of a water, a special kind of mixture of solutes like salt particle within the solvent like water particle. During osmosis, water moves from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration of water through a selectively permeable membrane that is the cell membrane. This cell membrane has small openings that let the water molecules pass through it, but it won't allow the larger objects like salt molecules to move freely through it. As you can see, the red broken line is the semi-permeable membrane. On the first picture, the same side have the same quantity of water, and the second picture, the right side has many quantity of water than the left side, because right side area has a lower concentration. Because during osmosis, water moves from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration of water. Remember, lower level of water has a higher level of solutes like salt and sugar, and higher concentration area has no or fewer solutes on it. Three types of solution: hypertonic, isotonic, hypotonic. The hypertonic solution with higher salt concentration. Isotonic concentration of water is seen on either sides of the semi-permeable membrane. Hypotonic solution with a higher water concentration. In addition, osmosis can also be defined as the spontaneous movement of a solvent's molecules through a semi-permeable membrane from a lower concentration solution to a higher concentration solution.
Osmosis can only function in a liquid medium, but diffusion can occur in all three mediums: solid, liquid, and gas. Furthermore, osmosis requires a semi-permeable membrane, while diffusion does not. Diffusion can occur in any mixture, including one that includes a semi-permeable membrane, while osmosis always occurs across a semi-permeable membrane. One big difference between osmosis and diffusion is that both solvent and solute particles are free to move in diffusion, but in osmosis, only the solvent molecule, water molecule, cross the membrane.
Now, let's have this table. This table represents the difference between osmosis and diffusion. On osmosis, it is limited only to the liquid medium. On diffusion, it occurs in liquid, gas, and even solids. On osmosis, it requires a semi-permeable membrane. In diffusion, it does not require a semi-permeable membrane. On osmosis, it depends on the number of the solute particle dissolved in the solvent, and on the diffusion, depends on the presence of other particles, and so on.
There are three types of transportation. One of them is the facilitated transportation or diffusion. Facilitated diffusion or transportation is a type of a passive transport. Facilitated transport is one way of moving those materials without expending cellular energy. It is a type that the proteins are facilitating or helping things pass. Charged ions often require a protein channels in order to pass through. Glucose needs the help of a transport protein to pass through. Facilitated diffusion requires membrane proteins to transport biological molecules. Simple diffusion is one that occurs unassisted by membrane proteins. Since membrane proteins are needed for transport in facilitated diffusion, the effect of temperature is often more pronounced than simple diffusion. These are all examples of facilitated diffusion. It requires transport proteins and move with concentration gradient of high to low concentration. Always remember that facilitated have a carrier proteins. Large molecules move through the carrier proteins still moving from high concentration to low concentration, and carrier proteins are required to allow large or charged molecules to pass across the membrane.
Active transport requires energy input from a cell and enables a cell to move a substance against its concentration gradient, from a region of lower concentration to a region of higher concentration. Active transport is powered by chemical energy. Active transport occurs through protein pumps. Cells use active transport to maintain homeostasis. Active transport moves molecules from a low concentration to a high concentration against the concentration gradient. This is the opposite of diffusion and osmosis. Active transport is carried out by protein. Protein cell membrane, they have specific finding site from the exact molecules they're transporting. The substance bind to the protein carriers on the lower concentration side, and using energy from respiration, protein carriers release the substance on the other side of the cell membrane.
Let us go on to the factors that affects the rate of diffusion. So the first factor that affects the rate of diffusion across a cell membrane is temperature. When the temperature increases, the particles collide more quickly. Particles move due to the kinetic energy associated with them. As temperature increases, the kinetic energy associated with each particle also increases. As a result, particles will move faster. In opposite, when the kinetic energy associated with the molecules decreases, so does their movement. As a result, the rate of diffusion will be slower. Lastly, diffusion is faster at higher temperature because the gas molecules will have a greater kinetic energy, so they will move and mix more quickly.
Concentration gradient is the process of particles, which are sometimes called solutes, moving through a solution or gas from an area with a higher number of particles to an area with a lower number of particles. The greater the difference in concentration from one side of the membrane to the other, the faster the rate of diffusion across that membrane. Think of it as an intersection which has one side filling up with traffic and the other not so much. What lane will the traffic guard will focus more? Essentially that it will focus more on the area which has much more traffic to let it pass through rather than the other side which has less traffic. So think of it as a one-way pass of one more before the other, utterly cycling between what has greater traffic or less traffic. The traffic in diffusion are solutes, moving through solution, liquid or gas, and happen to be by random motion until there are equal numbers of particles in two areas. Random motion is defined as the movement that occurs by a chance because there is no order or regular system by which the movement of the particles shift in a solution or gas. This is essentially meaning that the movement of these solutes are facilitated by themselves and are not interacted upon by any other means.
The next factor that affects the diffusion rates across the cell membrane is the surface area to volume ratio. This basically means that if the ratio between the surface area of the cell and the volume of the diffusing substance is higher, the faster the rate of the diffusion is. Wherein as the cell size increases, the ratio becomes smaller, where many parts of the cell are farther from the external environment, which results in the diffusion of becoming slower. Smaller cells take lesser time for the substances like oxygen to diffuse throughout the cell since it has higher surface area to volume ratio compared to the larger cells with lower surface area to volume ratio. And that is why humans are built up of millions of very small cells so that the substances are able to travel throughout the body.